Imagine if hunting and angling were to disappear. Would you care? Would it impact you? Would it change the world around you? Nearly 45 million people hunt and fish recreationally each year in the United States and Canada, bringing hundreds of millions of pounds of healthy food to our tables. Yet no serious effort has been made to assess the actual amount or the economic value and dietary significance of the wild meat and fish that we harvest and consume. The recreational harvest of wildlife in North America is one of the most sustainable, healthy, and environmentally friendly food procurement systems in existence. However, we do not know its real economic, social, or conservation value. How many pounds of locally sourced protein do we get from wild harvested fish and game each year? How much of this food will be shared with family and friends, and with people who do not hunt or fish? What does this mean for our food security? What could this mean for our food insecurity? How much would it cost to replace this wild food through agriculture and aquaculture? How much wildlife habitat would have to be converted, and how much fuel, water, fertilizer, and pesticides would be required? What would the harvesting, processing, and transportation costs be? How much more harm to the environment? The short answer is, today, we don't know. The Wild Harvest Initiative will tell us. One of the things that may surprise a lot of people, I guess, in Canada and the United States is the sheer numbers of citizens who face food insecurity. That number is about 44 million people. I'm hoping that the Wild Harvest Initiative is going to remind people one of the very best ways to provide food for the people is to enhance the capacity of natural systems to produce more wildlife. To provide the absolute finest wild meat and fish that it's possible for human beings to attain. The 40 to 50 million people who actually harvest all of this wild meat and fish, they do an amazing thing. They eat it all. And we have incredibly abundant wildlife populations that could be managed to increase the amount of wild food that can be made available to the citizens of our countries. One of the great things about spending time in the outdoors is that people reconnect with what is their natural home. It was our natural home for 99% of our human existence, and every aspect of it, from the physicality of it, the smells, the wind, the sun, the rain. Every aspect of it reminds us that it's right, that it's where we belong. The wild meat is generally higher in protein. It is higher in minerals and vitamins. It is lower in cholesterol than many other domestic forms of protein production. But it also relates to the physical activity that we must undertake to actually acquire it. There is a growing body of evidence to indicate that there are psychological and psychophysiological impacts of spending time in nature that are real. And it is my prediction we are going to find that there is a greater and even stronger series of benefits that come to people when they harvest nature. There are many, many roles for people in supporting wildlife and wildlife harvesting. There will be a lot of people who will never hunt, and they'll never fish. But that doesn't mean that those people cannot be not only supportive of those activities, but who will partake in those activities to some extent by actually eating the food. I believe if anybody is responsible for the deliberate death of a wild creature, then I think they cross the line in terms of responsibility. I think animal welfare should be the concern of everybody. People will turn around and say, but you hunt animals, don't you? How can you have a concern for animal welfare? What animal that we might consume lives better? The animal that we have to keep under close control, often in small circumstances and in crowded circumstances, or an animal that lives its entire life in the wild. It was born naturally, it lived naturally, and yes, at some point in time, it was killed and it was eaten by another animal. Which of those two animals would you say lives under the system of greater welfare? Maintaining ecological benefits through any food procurement system might, I suppose, most simply be saying, do the least amount of harm to the natural environment possible. And I think the individuals who participate in the harvest actually accomplish that. They manage to harvest vast amounts of food, but they do so in a way that does not lead to habitat destruction, that does not require the input of chemicals of any kind, of fertilizers or pesticides. It does not require that the animals be treated with antibiotics or any kind of disease protection system, and that they simply harvest these wild animals largely through hunting on foot. That does very, very little damage to the natural environment. There are very, very few food procurement systems in the world that can say that this is true about them. I think the wild harvesting by recreational users has a very, very high score with respect to maintaining ecological integrity and the ecological benefits of natural landscapes.
You know, one of the most amazing things about all this food is that nobody can tell us exactly where it's all come from. Unlike those of us who harvest our own food, we know exactly where that food comes from.
There's a big myth out there that wildlife exists by accident. You just take people out of the equation and it will all be there. Well, let me tell you, that's not how it works. The group of people who participate are by far and away the single most supportive group economically of conservation programs in Canada and in the United States. The hunter and angler pays, of course, for the privilege to be able to hunt and fish. He buys a license. Pay excise taxes of the equipment that they use that have actually provided billions, with a B, directly to the conservation of wildlife in state and provincial circumstances. And there's no doubt that there are many, many circumstances where small local communities rely very, very heavily, if not for their very existence, on the hunting and angling seasons and the numbers of people who come into their locales at that time. But further, think about the economic demands on society writ large. If hunting and angling go away, it has to be provided in some other way. And that is going to place an enormous financial burden on society writ large, whereas right now, the vast majority of that burden is borne by the very people who engage in those activities. Why anyone would want to throw that economic model out and replace it with an alternative one, I don't know. It is easy for somebody to say, perhaps, that I don't really care about these activities of hunting and angling because I don't do them. They are capable of living in circumstances such as a high-rise in a large urban center and believe that they are not impacted by what happens in the natural world in their country, then I guess they don't eat. And I guess they don't drink water, and I guess they don't breathe air.
There can be no doubt of its potential to a normalizing of hunting and angling, to a renewed and escalated benefits assessment of wildlife's value, and to increased efforts for wildlife conservation.
If hunting and angling were to disappear, it would impact you. It would change the world around you. And I sincerely hope you do care.